you know. So, but
Yeah, for
man,
sure.
but I love your story. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Oh, for sure. No, I listened to a few of your podcasts, and yeah, definitely great interviews, and so I'm really excited to be on with you.
Right, cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I'm interested. I've always had this part of me that's always wanted to surf. Now I've bodyboarded and done things, but I didn't grow up in the environment, so I'm always fascinated with that sport. So before we peel back the layers and get to that, I want to know, how did you survive the last 3.5 years going through this pandemic? How did you get through it, and how did it change you?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it's actually done a lot of good actually from came from the pandemic. So at the time at the time I was working I was working a part-time job at BMW, and I was test driving cars. So in my local town that I grew up in, which was Port Hueneme, it's about an hour north of LA
Okay.
and kind of in between LA and Santa Barbara. But so I was up there, I was doing that, and my girlfriend at the time, which is who I live with now, my fiance, but she was living in LA. So I would drive back and forth. And when the pandemic hit, they laid everybody off. They paused, they froze all the work and everything. So I was out of a little part-time job. I was still surfing professionally, and I had a clothing company. So she was like, "Well, why don't you just come down and just hang out for, a week and not have any work?" And I was like, "Okay." And so came down there or came down here, and basically just never left. So I it that definitely changed. But what happened was, I had the clothing company, and we're just starting. It was a small company, and what the pandemic really did for us for that was, which was a blessing, it really got me focusing on our online sales and finding ways to market the business via online. Because at that time we had online store where there was focus on social media, but it was more of like I show up to surf contests, and it was like our community, but it's just so small, right? You can't really grow. So I ended up really growing the business, and you know, during that pandemic, I mean, it literally just like set the brand off, and now we have a legit brand, which is amazing. And I don't think I would have done it. I think it would have been a lot slower process, if that didn't happen. The second thing that was really cool was, I surf professionally. I I used to do some high performance coaching with like up and coming, like, kids that are aspiring to be professional, and but that was about it. And it wasn't that consistent. It was here and there, and it just wasn't really something I was into. And then during the pandemic, everything closed, right? None of the kids could go to summer camp. There was, I mean, even the beaches closed for a while. So
Yeah.
once the beaches started to kind of open up, which were the first things that were opening up for people, I started getting a lot of requests from parents down here in LA, like, can you teach my son or my daughter to surf? And at first I didn't really want to do it because I'm like, I don't want to teach beginners. I'm above that and blah blah blah. And so I finally said, okay, you know what? I'll do it. And I remember, like, I'll never forget the first lesson I did was with this girl. She was like 5 or 6, and I remember I pushed her into this little whitewash, this tiny little wave. She stood up on it and rode it. And the look in her face and the happiness that came from that, it like it completely changed the way I look at teaching.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with teaching. And so now I have a surf school. You know, last year I did like 250 lessons. I'm super booked up, and I love it. I work with beginners to intermediate, advanced, everything. And yeah, it's like I found it was kind of like a new career in my surf world that I never knew that I would enjoy. So yeah, those were the two big things that I really got from that pandemic for sure.
That's cool, man. Hopefully one day she hears this and realizes that she was such a catalyst for you to do that,
Yeah,
you know?
that would be cool.
That'd be totally cool.
That would.
So let's say just looking holistically at what you do on a daily basis. Well, I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders. It's career day. And one of the kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How would you answer that child?
So I have three things I do. So I run a clothing brand. I teach kids like you how to surf. And I also have a digital marketing agency, which means I build websites and I help businesses expand their growth online.
So what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream?
In the third grade, I really don't know. I couldn't even honestly couldn't tell you. I I probably wanted to be like a pro skateboarder or
Yeah.
something. I started skateboarding really young. I didn't start surfing till I was 12. And so I had my uncles were really big in the skate world. So they were really big in skateboarding. And so I was always skateboarding around and trying to follow them around. So that was probably it. But I honestly have I can't even remember what I wanted to be in third grade.
Well, I would assume that that would probably have been akin to it. I remember growing up, I'm 51 and I remember growing up in the 80s and the kids that would skate. I remember there was one guy. I think I even remember his name. I think his name was Cord Burke, and he had a huge half pipe in his backyard. I mean, just everybody went to his house, and it blows my mind now that like Vans are the hip thing. Even grandparents are wearing Vans because I remember back in the day that was a pretty niche kind of thing, and now it's a big deal. I've watched the documentaries, and I'm just fascinated by how that world rolls. So I'm curious, when did you take to the water? When did you know that you had this talent that would blossom into a pro career?
Yeah, for sure. And just to piggyback off what you just said, the Vans thing is always it's so interesting for me as well because I do have a brand and I always look at how some brands just can go to any avenue in the world and it has that popularity. And then the timelessness of things, right? Like
Uh-huh.
you look at Nike or you look at other brands like that, shoe companies, but like Vans made one design, one style,
Yes.
and it's so simple and it's not a comfortable shoe. It's
Right.
not a well-designed shoe, like really. And I have Vans, they fall apart all the time and they're not
Yes.
comfortable on my feet. So, but you'll see, people in hip hop, people across in any genre, they usually have like one pair of Vans in their closet, and that is amazing. And it still baffles me to
It's
this
mind
day.
blowing.
Yeah, but anyway, um, yeah. So as far as surfing, so I grew up in Venice, California. So I grew up in LA, and I lived here until I was 10, and I did not surf when I was down here. Partly because I didn't have a lot of like my dad surfed at the time, but he never pushed it on me. But it's not a big surfing community as far as quality, like quality of surfers and quality. The waves are not good in LA. It's like they're terrible. So I did go in the ocean, but I never really had that desire to ride waves. I was just skateboarding. And then at my the company my dad was working for, they ended up moving up to this little town called Port Hueneme, which is Ventura County, and it's just this tiny little town, and they're moving the business. So they 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 gave my dad like an offer and said, "Hey, if you move up there, we'll help you with the down payment on your home, and help set you guys up." And so he was like, "Okay." So we ended up just going up to this little town, and and that area is probably some of the I shouldn't say it, but probably some of the best surf in California.
Yeah.
And it's uncrowded. It's more crowded these days, but back then it was really uncrowded. It was very local. You couldn't just roll up to the beach and bring some friends because they'd kick you out. Like it was pretty crazy back then. But I lived there. I was able to start surfing, And I remember the very first wave I ever took, still to this day perfectly. It was like a nice sunny day. It was like around noon. And I remember I was on a boogie board with my friends, and my dad was surfing, and he got out and he was talking to some people on the beach, and his board was sitting there. And I remember getting out and I just said, "Hey, can I try the board real quick?" And he was like, "Yeah, go ahead." So I grabbed the board, and I took this little whitewash and I stood up on my first wave and I rode it. And I just remember going, wow, this is so much better than boogie boarding. And so from that moment on, I was like, oh, can I get a board? So then I had a board, I would surf, and then I would kind of shift back and forth for the first year. I'd go boogie because I was really good at boogie boarding. So I would surf, and then I sucked. And then I'd go, oh, I want to go do what I'm good at. So then I'd boogie board for a couple of days, and then I try surfing. And eventually I just started to get better at surfing. And after about a year, I knew this is what I want to do for a living.
Wow, that's amazing. So,
Yeah.
who's been kind of an inspiration or a hero for you in your life?
As far as just surfers that I've looked up to, like Kelly Slater, he was he was about 19 at the time when I first saw like heard of him and started watching him. And yeah, and there was a bunch like Rob Machado. There was a few guys that were, really killing it at that time that were pushing the level. And that was basically who I inspired to be. And I would just watch surf videos, and I didn't know any of these guys personally. I would
Yeah.
just watch videos, all day, every day, and just, I just kept working on my skill that way.
Yeah. So, as a businessman or just in general, what's been the best advice you've ever gotten?
Oh wow. Been so much. I guess it depends on I guess it really just depends on what the business is. So if life in general, I guess I heard a quote recently that it was so good. It was everything you've ever wanted in life is on the other side of fear.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've grown up always doing was pretty much taking the easy route. And when I say what I mean by that is, when I was growing up surfing is such a laid back kind of, or it can be such a laid back, fun, relaxing sport. And if you want to make it, let's say there's a kid that wants to make it as a professional surfer. The amount of work that you really have to do and consistency, whether now it's different because now there's social media and you have to be self-promoting. But back then you really had to network, and you had to go down and meet the people that were running the magazines and try to get a shot in a magazine and see if you could link up with certain photographers. And you had to be outgoing if you weren't from that area. Like it's really niche, and so I was in this little bubble up there. It was kind of like a secret little area, and I was working on my skills, but I wasn't doing the things that made me uncomfortable, like go down to Huntington Beach and try to network and stuff like that. And so as far as now with the marketing agency that I have and everything that I'm doing, it's you have to just be networking, you have to be reaching out, you have to be taking meetings with with people that are on another level than you, and really expanding yourself. And so I think for me that's the one thing that I really live by now, is to try to get uncomfortable daily
Yeah.
with whatever you're doing. Just once you start feeling comfortable, that it's not good.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what is the motivation for you every day? You got a lot going on. What is the thing that gets you out of bed that motivates you to not only do all of these things that you do, but to evolve as a person?
Yeah, for sure. So I have two major things that in my life as far as my drive. So one, I have a fiance, and we have a 1 year old, just turned one,
Nice.
baby boy. So every day I look at him, and I want to have an amazing life for him. I didn't grow up with a lot of money, and I don't think money is the key, but I do want to be able to take him on awesome trips and I want him to see the world. I was lucky enough to have that because had sponsors that paid me to do that. So I was really fortunate. But I do want to, that is definitely my number one motivation. And then the second thing is, my whole life has been geared around the surf. Okay. So I always say surfing has been a blessing and a curse at the same time. And I say that because it's so it's so conducive to the actual the conditions, the swell size, you know, and and even the swell direction is gonna push waves to different beaches. So you're constantly every day looking at charts, trying to see, oh, when's it gonna be good tomorrow, or where can I go today? And you're constantly searching, and it's this addiction. And once you're like a true surfer and you're really surfing, and once that taps into you, it's so hard when you see, if like somebody calls you or you see on your phone that the waves are really good somewhere and you're not there. The amount of FOMO and that feeling is so hard. So my whole life I've based whatever work I'm doing around having freedom of some time, so I can drop what I'm doing and go surf for an hour and then come back to whatever I'm doing. And it's why I took on being like an entrepreneur and starting businesses, because I just don't want that 9 to 5 where I'm just locked somewhere and I can't like I'm missing waves. So it's those are my
Yeah.
two big motivations. Um, Still to this day, like I still it kills me when I know it's good and I have work to do, and now I have a little bit less time, so I have to be a little more strategic and plan my days. But yeah, those are those are the two for sure.
The one thing about sports is that whether there's all these factors that go into it that affect it, but I don't know that there's anything that affects it as much as surfing because you genuinely have to have the ocean interact with you in the right way. What was the best day that you ever charted? One of the most just epic days. The waves were right. You found the chart, you got the information, the intel, whatever. Is there a day that stands out to you?
Um, Not in particular. There's so many, you
Yeah,
know, usually like once, usually each year has about 5 days that are truly memorable. And
yeah,
that's it.
yeah.
Like 5 days.
Wow.
And those are the days where everything comes together, the wind, the swell, the crowd. If it's too crowded, that we can really kill the session. And and yeah, I think really the probably the most memorable session that I've ever had, let's see, was in Indonesia, and it was on the Mentawai Islands, and we had one there was one day because we did this trip where you basically live on a boat for like 2 weeks, and you just travel around all these different islands and you just surf, but there's other people doing the same thing. So sometimes you come to a spot and there's already like 3 boats. And I do remember this session that we had where we pulled up to this spot. There was one boat there, and right when we get there, they were leaving. They're like, yeah, we got to leave. And we had it all day to ourselves. It was just me and a couple of my friends. And and yeah, that day I can still remember it like it was yesterday. So I
Yeah.
would say probably that is the most memorable, I guess, that I can think of at the moment. But yeah, so many days. There's so many little days where you go out, you're out for 2 hours, but there was like a window of 40 minutes
Yeah.
where it was empty. Maybe you just have one friend and you're just trading waves, and it's just, that little time block
Yeah.
can just stay with you for so long.
That has to deepen your appreciation for so many things to be in that position where you literally have to, if you have 5 days a year, technically, you really understand and savor life much more, I would imagine.
Yeah, especially these days now that I'm so much busier,
Yeah.
when I do have a chance and I'm paddling out, I do really I really appreciate it. You know, I take it all in and I don't take it for granted like I did when I was serving professionally. I mean, I have a not a great like a kind of a bad session. Maybe I was falling a little too much and I'd get out frustrated. And it's like you're just so jaded by the fact that I was able to surf every day all day and no responsibility.
Yeah.
And now it's like, wow, I really like yesterday I surfed, I did a lesson, I surfed, the waves were terrible. And I started to get that feeling creeping in when I was looking at it and I was sitting on the beach with in my wetsuit and I was watching my student like paddle out and I'm sitting there like this is terrible. Some of the worst waves I've ever surfed. But then I was like, you know what? This could be way worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I paddled out, ended up having a fun time. But yeah, every once in a while it tries to creep in, but I always remind myself, you know.
Yeah. So of all of the things that you've done professionally in your life, what are you the proudest of?
Professionally, I'd say for me, for surfing, you know, I won a national title when I was 19, and that was a big deal definitely back then. That was basically all the surfers who had qualified for this national contest from Hawaii, California, and East Coast of the United States. So it was a big deal. It was a lot of really talented surfers and I didn't have a sponsor at that time. I had somebody making me surfboards, but I didn't have any sponsors. So I kind of came out of nowhere
Yeah.
from my little town and just came in and I ended up winning it and that was the third year in a row that I did that contest and the 2 years prior I failed miserably like first heat out gone and yeah, so that was literally a big accomplishment, you know,
Yeah.
for that. As far as like business, other business, I feel like every day I always feel behind. So I try to wake up every day and I tell myself I have no money, I'm at zero. And so that every day I wake up and I feel hungry and I'm like, okay, how do I get away from zero? And so I think the fact that I can keep that motivation for me is the biggest success that I feel so far because it's sometimes it's business is just so tough and it's so hard to stay positive,
Yeah.
you know? And I've had times where I'm like, shit, should I just get a job? Like this is it's hard to keep this going and you know, and you always have ups and downs. And so yeah, I think just my consistency over time is my greatest success with business.
So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, clients, everybody that you're teaching, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, that's a good question. Hmm. I don't think I've ever had that question asked to me. My perception of me. I think you know, I'm definitely empathetic. I I've learned that just from doing surf lessons, you really have to be empathetic. You have to really understand the student or it's hard to help them.
Yeah.
So I think that's a trait that I hold dearly. And also I would say, wow, that's a tough question. It's a good question. That and I'm, you know, I'm very this is a good one. I would say empathetic and you know, I think just my drive. I do believe people understand my drive and I feel that you know, I'm not one to give up easy when things get tough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it. So if anyone out there wants to get involved with your clothing line, learn more about you, reach out, get lessons, how do they do that? What's the best way?
Yeah, so clothing line is ruettclothing.com. So Ruett, I like the shirt.
Yes, sir.
Ruett. You can go there and check us out. And for as far as surf lessons, it's SPF Surf School. And yeah, so if you're in California, definitely hit me up. And the marketing agency is Subtide Marketing. And and that's it. If you have any, yeah, basically any business, anything that you need some help with, whether it's websites or Facebook ads, just basically anything digital to get you dialed in, definitely reach out.
Right on. Jeremy,
Yeah.
thank you, sir. I appreciate your story. I appreciate your time. It's been fascinating.
Thank you so much. Yeah, great. That was a great talk.
Have a good new year, man.